Most people quit too soon. What weight loss taught me about time, identity, and expectations. Over the years, quite a few people have asked me how I lost weight. The conversation usually followed a familiar pattern. Someone would notice that I'd lost a significant amount of weight and ask what I had done. I'd explain the basics. Calories matter, food choices matter, consistency matters. There was never much mystery to it. Most people seemed relieved. They were expecting some secret. Instead, they got a fairly ordinary process. The interesting part came afterward. At first, they were enthusiastic. They wanted details. They wanted meal plans. They wanted to know exactly how I had approached it. Then, more often than not, I never heard about it again. Occasionally, I'd ask how things were going. Sometimes they had stopped after a week, sometimes after a month, rarely much longer than that. For a long time, I assumed the problem was motivation. Now I think it was expectations. Most people start with a picture in their minds of where they want to end up. They can imagine the leaner body, the visible abs, or the lower number on the scale. What they often can't imagine is the amount of time required to get there. That's not a criticism. I didn't understand it either. Like many people, I spent years trying different approaches before I finally lost the weight and kept it off. Looking back, I don't think those earlier attempts failed because I chose the wrong diet. The bigger issue was that I still viewed the entire process as temporary. The assumption was always the same: lose the weight, reach the goal, move on. What I eventually discovered was that there wasn't really a point where the process ended. The habits that helped me lose the weight were largely the same habits that helped me maintain it. The difference was that, over time, they stopped feeling like something I was forcing myself to do. They simply became part of my normal life. I think this is where many people run into trouble. They treat fitness as a temporary project when it actually requires a permanent identity shift. The expectation is that a few months of effort will eventually earn a lifetime of results. In reality, the people who maintain impressive physiques tend to be the ones who found a way to integrate those habits into their daily lives. That realization took me a while. Even after losing a substantial amount of weight, I still thought of myself as a fat guy who was trying not to become fat again. Then, at some point, I noticed that the story I was telling myself no longer matched reality. I wasn't a fat guy trying to lose weight. I was an in-shape person maintaining healthy habits. The scale reflected the physical transformation, but that shift in identity was probably the more important change. The interesting thing is that this pattern isn't limited to fitness. I've experienced it myself in other areas. For years, I've occasionally decided that this would finally be the time I learned kanji properly. I've tried apps, flashcards, and various study methods. Every attempt began with good intentions. None lasted long enough to become part of my daily routine. Fitness eventually crossed that threshold. Kanji never did. That experience has made me less judgmental when people struggle with long-term goals. It's easy to assume that successful people simply have more discipline. I'm not convinced that's the whole story. In many cases, they stayed with the process long enough for it to become familiar. That's harder than it sounds. Most people underestimate the time horizon required for meaningful change. They assume progress should be obvious after a few weeks. When it isn't, doubt starts to creep in. A walk gets skipped because it's raining. A weekend turns into a free-for-all because friends want to go out. A missed workout becomes two missed workouts. Nothing dramatic happens. People usually don't abandon their goals in a single moment. They gradually shift away from them. What makes this unfortunate is that they may have been much closer than they realized. One lesson I've learned from tracking my own progress is that meaningful change often becomes obvious only in retrospect. If I look at photos from January and compare them to photos from today, the difference is striking. Living through those months, however, the changes felt much smaller. That's one reason I believe tracking matters. Without some form of evidence, it's easy to conclude that nothing is happening, when, in fact, quite a lot is happening. The longer I've been involved in fitness, the less interested I've become in motivation. Motivation is useful. It gets people started. The challenge is that meaningful change usually takes longer than motivation lasts. What matters after that is the environment you've built around yourself and the habits you've put in place. People sometimes tell me that I have a lot of discipline. I understand what they mean, but that description has never felt entirely accurate. Most of my routines require very little decision making now. Meals are planned, training is scheduled, walking is automatic. The system carries much of the load. That system didn't appear overnight. It took years to build, which brings me back to the lesson I keep seeing over and over again. Most people don't fail because they chose the wrong diet. Most people don't fail because they chose the wrong workout. More often, they underestimate how long meaningful change actually takes. When reality collides with the timeline they had imagined, they conclude that the process isn't working. The irony is that the process often is working. They simply haven't been doing it long enough to see the results. Most people are capable of far more change than they realize. The difficult part is staying in the game long enough to find out. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing, or support the project on Buy Me a Coffee.